So yeah, today we are talking about captivating customers by telling your story, and how you discover that story, the importance of that story, and how you communicate that in different ways. So that's what we'll be talking about. This is something that Scott and I do on a regular basis with our clients. So we're excited to talk to you about it today. So yeah, and just to introduce myself a little bit, like I said, my name's Chris Kanski. Um, I'm a fellow small business owner. Can relate to what you guys are doing. It's scary. It's exciting. Starting your own business. And I'm a marketing consultant for small businesses. I help businesses, from businesses that are just getting started to businesses that have been established and have some employees. I believe in small business. I love to help small businesses. And I have about 14 years of experience in marketing, working for other agencies, working as a marketing director for a company. And about 3 years ago is when I went, it was exactly 3 years ago last month is when I went full time with my company, with New Pillar Marketing. I left another position and made this my full-time gig. So, and like I said, I've worked with dozens of clients across Ohio, Pennsylvania, even some clients out on the West Coast that I work with. And just, I feel very, very fortunate to be able to work with small businesses and do this for a living. I'm very, passionate about it. So, and I'll let Scott introduce himself. So.
Yeah, and Chris, if you would just be able to advance that for me as I go down, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, hello everyone. My name is Scott Cunningham. I am the owner of Visual Element Media. We're headquartered in Duncansville, Pennsylvania, and I am also a small business owner, and we help businesses with digital communication. So that is essentially taking who they are and what they do and figuring out the best ways to get that out on any digital platform that is available. And so I started this company 13 years ago. Sorry, we're working towards our 14th year. And so I started the company while I was young and has been able to run the company ever since, which has been a blessing for that as well. We don't just work in Pennsylvania. We do work all across the country. We also have done some work in Canada with some small businesses there as well. And so part of our portfolio is looking at how do we help companies strategically position themselves with a good communication strategy. And then we also help with the production of that through video, social, and podcast content. So that's a little bit about my company and what we do.
And I'm sorry, Scott, I didn't quite keep up with you there on the clicking through the slides, but I think we got the idea. So, and yeah, with that, we'll kind of jump into what we're going to talk about today, just to kind of give you the high level overview. These will be our major sections that we'll go through. We're going to talk about discovering and communicating your story, as well as some of the importance of story and why it's a key strategy for communication. And then Scott will talk about connecting your story with your customers' needs. Once you have an idea of, well, this is my story, well then why should your customers care? Why is that important to them? So we'll go through that as well. And then we'll give some examples of how you communicate that story on different platforms, just so you can kind of see how that works, how that plays out in the real world. So that is what we'll go through. And I'll start here with how you discover and how you communicate your story. And I'll start here with, why is story so important? Why are we talking about this? Why is this something that we feel like is worth, taking your time here today to talk about what's so important about it. So so stories help us connect with one another. You know, if you're sitting down talking with someone and they start telling you a story, you know, especially particularly if it's a good story, but that draws you in, that helps you feel a connection, helps you empathize with them. It helps us to feel connected to one another. You know, stories bring together the head and the heart, the ideas and the emotions, you know, so stories are good at, you know, communicating information, you know, here's what happened, here's what happened next here, you know, but they also bring in that emotional part, and they, you know, again, they help us to relate to what's being communicated, because we all have our own story, we all have our own experiences. Stories hold our attention, you know. I mean, if you think about, you know, some of the best books that you've read, the best movies that you've seen, you know, even you know, people that you know that are really good storytellers. I mean, it draws you in almost like nothing else. You know, I know that I've sat down with or, you know, or a Netflix series or something like that. You know, it's just like, well, I just got to see just one more, and before you know, it's, you know, 3 a.m, because stories draw us in and stories hold our interest. You know, and our attention is pulled in so many different directions these days, that something that can hold our attention is really powerful. Stories give us a clear framework for understanding ideas. You know, sometimes you know, ideas that we're kind of trying to communicate can you know, can be a little hard to understand. Stories kind of give that a framework that allows it creates that understanding. Yeah. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of story. I'll go through this relatively quickly, and there, you know, I do have a point here. There isn't just kind of a pointless history lesson. You know, we'll go through and talk about, you know, because I think we're in a really important, exciting age for the history of storytelling, particularly for brands, for businesses in this time. So, you know, stories have been around forever. As long as there have been human beings, we have been telling stories, communicating through story, and that goes back to oral storytelling. You know, sitting around a fire, telling stories, whether they're made up or they're true. And you know, as you saw in that last slide, cave drawings. You know, people drawing out the story of, you know, hunting the woolly mammoth, or, you know, and you see a lot of that in ancient artifacts. It's just it's part of who we are. And then you had written storytelling, you know, with the Phoenicians, Egyptians, you know, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, the Old Testament of the Bible. You know, you had stories being written down for the first time. And then you know, you had theater beginning with the Greeks. You know, stories being acted out. You know, people gathering together to kind of watch this story unfold together. And then in 1440, you had the invention of the printing press, and that was the first time that stories could be, you know, widely distributed, because they didn't have to be copied by hand to be to go out to the masses. And then another big point for what we're talking about here is in the early 1900s, you had advertising becoming more popular, and that is, you know, it's brands communicating their story, and how that story is going to impact you. So that really started to become more popular in the early 1900s. And then the period that we're in now, that I think is really exciting, is you have the internet and you have social media becoming more popular. You know, always changing. There are always new ways new ways to communicate your story. And what it's really done is it's allowed smaller businesses like ours to communicate their story in a really powerful way. You don't need to pay for a commercial on television. You don't need to have a huge production company. You can record a video on your cell phone and you can put that out on Instagram. You can create a website yourself or have somebody create it for you and tell your story that way. You don't need to have a multi-million-dollar budget to tell your story. So that's what I think is so exciting about the period that we're in now, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about moving forward. So so we'll talk about your story. How do you figure out what that is? How do you communicate it? We all have a story, but I think sometimes it's hard for us to see that. So how do we lay that out? So first of all, every good story has a conflict or a problem. So what is what is that for you? Is that and that could be something that happened when you were younger in your childhood that kind of created some sort of desire in you. It could be something that happened when you were working for somebody else. What was the conflict or the problem that you were seeing, or what happened to you that you had to overcome that kind of drove you. And then with that, stories have a turning point, or they have multiple turning points, where something happens and things were never the same. So what is that in your story? What happened that kind of set you on the path that you're on now? Think back to what is that turning point, or what are a few turning points in my life that have made me want to start this business and made me want to do what I'm doing now. And then of course talk about where you are today. And this doesn't have to be that, well, now I've arrived and everything is perfect. Of course it's not going to be that, but it's what are you doing now that you've come through these conflicts, that this turning point has occurred? What are you doing? What does life look like for you now, or what does your business look like today? And then of course, where are you headed in the future? That's part of the story as well, is what do you want to be doing 5, 10, 20 years from now? That's part of your story as well. So and then I think this is a really important point, is just believing that your story is important. I think, I know I've struggled with this, is just thinking, well, I'm not, I haven't started a multi-million-dollar business. I haven't invented something or created something that changed the world. Why is my story important? Why do I need to tell it? Why is it important for me to tell it? And I think, we minimize our accomplishments, and we don't give ourselves enough credit when we do that. Actually, Scott and I had a podcast for a while, and we talked about possibly bringing it back in the future, but it was called Build Local. And we talked to business owners. And one of the things that we saw is a lot of podcasts talked to these business owners that had that story. They'd gone from $0 to $10 million in a few years. And the problem is that's just not realistic for most of us. So I think, I think telling stories that are, I don't know if realistic's the right word, but a little bit more, common, a little bit more grounded, I guess, is really important, because people can relate to that better than, a lot of the time, better than somebody that created something that had this impact across the globe. So your story is important. It can inspire people. It can help people, so it's important. Another thing about your story is to keep it simple. You want to be able to communicate it in a relatively short amount of time. You want to leave out a lot of unnecessary details. So just work on that and figure out what the important points are, and make sure you can hit those points. Like I said, stories hold our attention, but people's attention is still, it's more divided than it's ever been with technology and everything that people have going on in their lives. And another thing is to know your why. I don't know if you guys are familiar with, there's an author called Simon Sinek, and he wrote a book called Start With Why. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it, or go and watch some of his talks. He talks about, just how important it is to communicate why you're in business, why you're doing what you're doing, and how that draws people in. It draws people in that have similar values, that want the same things. So it's just very important. And the example that he gives, one of the examples is, he talks about Apple versus Microsoft. And I'm actually a Microsoft user myself, but Scott's shaking his head. He's a Mac Apple guy. But anyway, Apple does a much better job, or has historically done a much better job in communicating. Microsoft says, well, we have this program that does this, it has these features, and Apple says, think different. Don't be afraid to be yourself and to change the world, and it's a message that that draws people in, and then they, down the road, you can talk about, well, we have this program that does this, and the details of the product, but they start with why they're doing what they're doing. They want to change the world. They want to empower people that are change makers and thinking differently, so I would highly recommend, looking into some more resources on how to find your why, but it's an important part of your story. So, and then I kind of want to get into how, just, practically, how do you do this? So first of all, you want to write it down. You want to make sure it's good to have to be thinking it over and have a mental idea of what your story is, but put pen to paper, keyboard, make sure and it doesn't have to be written out like a novel, it doesn't even have to be in paragraph form, but write it down, at least, bullet point it out, outline it, so that you have something written down. And then I think another important step here is to share it with somebody. Share it with a friend or a family member, a few friends or family members, so that you can get some feedback. That's my next point here. But yeah, make sure you're asking that person for feedback, because maybe they remember some things differently. They see some things that you don't see, and you don't necessarily, have to take every bit of constructive criticism that they're giving, but make sure your your ears are open, that you're hearing what they're saying, and wanting that feedback of how you can make your story better, or how some things that you might want to include or leave out. Ask for that feedback. And then another thing related to that is let your story evolve over time. And this doesn't mean that you're making things up, but you are, I think as we go through life, we can see things in the past kind of in a different light, and you'll come to a point where, oh, that period that I went through, that was really important for my growth, or that's really important for getting me where I am today, or I learned a lot through that has helped me. So don't be afraid to allow your story to change, just because you've written it down, you've gotten feedback, this is what it is today. It may be something a little bit different tomorrow. You may see some things that you're not seeing now. So any questions? I see that we have some questions in the chat here. I'll pull these up. And Scott, you can feel free to jump in here as well. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. We do. We tend to minimize our accomplishments. Yeah, and I'm assuming you're Joy. You're talking about Simon Sinek. Yeah, he's one of my favorite authors, speakers. He's fantastic. I'll put his name here in the chat. Um, that's his name. Sinek. It's how you spell his last name. Oh, and Scott already did that. Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions on this section?
I have a quick question. If, as far as your story, so I kind of in a light way pitched to a group, and they were asking me about my story, and I was honest, and I was telling them it was kind of an irritation with a running joke in the Black community, but I
Okay.
didn't feel like that could be a story because it kind of felt like airing dirty laundry. So, any ideas for how to make it palatable?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think we want to be careful, that we're not, we're not gossiping or throwing other people under the bus as we tell our story. I mean, maybe there's a way to tell the story, but not talk about certain individuals, just kind of keep it real general. But I don't know. I mean, that is a good point. I think you want to be careful that you're not doing that. Maybe just keep the details vague, talk more about the lesson that you learned from it than about the specific people involved. I don't know if that's helpful.
That is, I think I can run with that. Thank you.
Okay, great. No problem.
Yes, we do have one more question in the chat there.
I saw that. Yeah, storytelling on social media is exhausting. Any pointers? Yeah, I get that. It can definitely be exhausting. Scott, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, storytelling is exhausting. I think the thing that we need to focus on is how our story is going to relate to our customers. And I'll get to that a little bit in connecting our story to our customers' needs. But I think really you want to keep your storytelling into short, very direct pieces. That way it's not so exhausting. So if you do have a post that you're thinking about putting out that's very long and very detailed, maybe consider breaking that up into smaller chunks so that people can remember it quicker as they're scrolling through social media. It's not so much that they need to take in at one time.
Yeah, that's great. I think another thing that I'd add there is don't, and I think I've made this mistake before, but don't try to be somebody else on social media. Maybe you're seeing people that are communicating in a certain way or making these longer videos or something like that, and that, or they're just be yourself, and communicate in a way that feels authentic to you. And I think if you do that, it's not so, it's just less exhausting. It doesn't grate so much with who we are, and that's probably a longer discussion of how to do that exactly. But you don't have to be any other business owner. You can look at what other people are doing, but you don't have to do exactly what others are doing on social media, particularly if it's something that every time you go and try to do it, it's just a huge chore. Yeah, that's a good question as well. Somebody said, I want to tell my story, however, I'm naturally private. Any advice for breaking outside of that? I mean, I would say start small, maybe share a little bit here and there. in order to get more comfortable with it. You know, you don't have to put your entire story out there at once. And like I said, you can, you know, sometimes it's okay, I think, to be vague on the details, so you're not, you know, kind of breaking that privacy. You're sticking with what you're comfortable with. So those would, Scott, you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, again, I would say I fell into that category at the beginning of my career too. I was much more private, didn't like being on camera, didn't like sharing details of parts of my life. But I think really you want to only share what's going to be pertinent to your customer base. You don't need to go into everything that's happened in your life. You kind of want to stick to that pivot point of why you're moving into the business that you're moving into and how it's going to help your customers improve their life. And it doesn't mean that you have to do video. It doesn't mean that you have to do things that are super public, as in, you know, presenting something. You can start out by, maybe you create something that's more graphic based, where you have a character that you can market through. Like if you have a mascot for your business, tell your story through maybe an inanimate object. And then that way you kind of have a mascot that's telling the story, so that you can kind of still be behind that. And then as you grow in your comfortability, you know, you can step out from behind that as well. I've seen that work a lot of different ways for people who are a little bit more private and maybe just aren't used to communicating in a public fashion.
Hello,
Okay.
I have a question for you. So with myself, I've kind of created my story, but I find sometimes you have to, like you said, pivot. Sorry about that. You have to pivot, and it's kind of adjusting the story in a sense, depending on the audience. It's not that you necessarily change it, but I guess listening or knowing who it is you're talking to, how do you go about, I guess is my question, pivoting in those moments? Because it's still pertinent, but at the same time, I may have to adjust it, I guess, to fit that person or that audience that I'm seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you know, and that doesn't mean, again, that doesn't mean you're not being genuine, or that you're, you know, lying or making up parts of your story. It's just different things are going to connect with different people. And I think knowing that and understanding that is part of being a good being a good marketer. You know, you know your audience. You know, I think if you have time before you're communicating your story with a different group, you know, you can sit down and make some notes, and maybe maybe I'll leave that part out. Oh, this is really gonna connect with them. You know, so if you have time, sit down and kind of review that. You know, and yeah, know your audience. Do as much research as you can. Ask questions. You know, I mean, before I do something like this, I mean, this is the second presentation that I've done. You know, with Women's Business Center, with ECDI. You know, but before the first presentation, I asked them, well, who are these people I'm going to be talking to? What types of businesses do they own? Where are they on that journey? You know, so asking good questions, and then, yeah, don't be afraid to adjust your story as necessary to make that connection. Okay. So yeah, I think Scott, I'll turn it over to you. You want to go through the next section? He's gonna start sharing his screen. You're welcome.
All right, can everyone see that?
I think that's the.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Communicating your story across platforms.
Yes, I'm going to back it up here. popped in the wrong slide, which is, all right, so here we are. So in this little section, we're going to be talking about connecting your story to your customers' needs. And I just want to reiterate that over these next few slides, if you're anything like me, you'll have a question whenever I say something and it'll ping in your brain. And then by the time you get to the end where it's question time, I'll forget it. And so please feel free to write it in the comments down below, and I'll get back to them here in just a few minutes and answer them. So as Chris was saying, we need to figure out this why. And so I think we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to try to perfect it and to try to figure out, we have to have it 100% correct, and it has to be flawless before we start communicating. And I think we need to understand that there is no perfect formula. There is no arrival at this, perfected story before we can start talking about it. And so we need to realize that what works for one company may not work for another. What works today probably won't work tomorrow. An example that I gave is I was taking a business class in my senior year in high school. And this would have been 2007. And we were learning how to design newspaper ads. And so shortly after that, Facebook also came out in 2007. And so shortly after that, if I wouldn't have adapted and I would still be focusing on newspaper ads, I probably wouldn't have reached the level of success that I've gotten to experience, because that plan didn't work as effectively anymore. Now, you still can use newspaper ads, and that's where knowing your audience is really important. So you need to be able to pivot and to adapt, and that's what makes entrepreneurs entrepreneurs. They're able to see how trends are moving, and they're able to move their business in that way. The downfall to this is that it takes time, it takes energy, it's exhausting. And whenever I say that it takes time and energy, this isn't something that you can, I'll say this, most of us aren't fortunate enough to be able to spend an hour or two and put together a full-fledged communication strategy and it work. It could take days, weeks, it could take months to figure out what's going to work for you. And a lot of times, once you figure out what's working well, something's going to change. The economy begins to go in a different direction, or businesses begin to change how they want to communicate. And now you're back to square one and you need to do it again. So where do we start? Chris talked about developing your why, and that's our foundation. That's what we always come back to. So on the really hard days, we need to go back to, why are we in business? On the really good days, we need to come back to, this is why we're doing this. And in those mediocre days where we're not quite sure, is this a good day? Is this a bad day? As entrepreneurs, we know that, we have about 180 different pivots throughout the day between, oh, this is a great day, this is a bad day. That's just how our days go. But we always need to be able to come back to something rock solid, and that is why we're in business in the first place. And so some of you may be thinking, so Scott, how does sharing my story sell more products and services? Fill that in with your blank. What does your business offer? How does sharing my story get me more business? What is it about it? And this is a really common question that I get asked. And I want to start by saying, yes, sales are vital to our company's growth. We need them. How we approach selling is where our story gets integrated into the process. If we only focus on making a transaction, we become a transaction-based company. And that can go well for a while, but it's very cold. And people are going to be able to say, I don't have a connection, I just go to this company. So what we want to do is focus on inserting our story before that transaction process. Why do people want to do business with us? What benefits do we provide as a business that's going to help them beyond the transaction? And so we want to shift our focus to look at that. Now, our story is going to show our customers what we do, how we operate, what we believe in, and how they are going to benefit. We need to kind of shift our focus from ourselves, from our story, and now we need to look at our customers' story. What is it that they need? And we have to connect the two. Because the reality is, most of us aren't in areas where we are the sole business that does what we do. I'm not the only digital marketing company or digital communications company in my area. There are many others, but I'm the only one that has my story, my background, and my perspective. And so I can go get a pizza from a lot of different pizza shops, but there are a few in which I frequent. Why? Because there's a connection. There's a reason why I go to them. And so that's what's going to be the differentiation between a customer choosing your business or another business. And that's what's going to keep them coming back time and time again. So one of the things that I fear that we are losing in our society is the desire to grow. You know, we've convinced ourselves that we have it pretty good, and we do, generally speaking, have it really good. But as entrepreneurs, you've probably figured out that we're never really satisfied with where we are. We always want to figure out, how do we improve? How do we do this better? How do we become more efficient? How do we reach more people? And a lot of people look at us like we're crazy, and there might be some truth to that. I mean, we tend to have some out there ideas that we need to kind of rein in sometimes, but I think that's good for the overall health of not just our business, but our communities as well. So through communicating who we are and what we believe in, we realize that the communities that we serve look up to us as people that are motivating, people that are encouraging, and people that they want to stand behind and support. But if we aren't sharing our story, if we're not talking about what we do and how it's going to benefit the community, they're not going to stand behind us for long. So we need to figure out who we're targeting and how do we mesh those two things together, our story and our customers' needs. So how do we connect with customers? One, we need to figure out that customer's need. And the hard thing that took me a lot of years to realize is not every customer needs my services. I'm looking for customers that do. And filtering through that, there can be a lot of hurt. There can be a lot of discouragement. You know, when you meet with a company and you say, oh yeah, you definitely, you know, I can definitely help you in this. And they say, we actually don't need that service because we're getting it taken care of in some other way. And so we need to figure out who we're actually after. What problem or conflict does our service or product solve? And then who needs that? And then does it actually meet that service? So an example of this would be, I was meeting with a client and they were having trouble with their menu. It was for a restaurant. And so I said, well, you know, what if we created an all new design on the menu? And, you know, we worked around it for a long time. And what they actually needed was not a new menu design, but they just needed to switch up some of the items on their menu. You know, they'd had the same, you know, menu items for decades, and they hadn't been adding some new stuff. And so what I was offering them wasn't actually the right solution for them. So we need to make sure that we're actually meeting the need and not selling them something that they don't need. And then that comes back to following through on our promises. Are we selling them what we can actually provide? Don't oversell. It'd be better to undersell than to oversell. And this has been something that, again, I'm a people pleaser. So I want to be able to supply every solution to every problem, but it's just not possible. So make sure if you say we can fix this, that you actually are taking the time to fix it and to help the customers. So Here's something that is really interesting. And if you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then you're going to be a little bit familiar with this. So we need to figure out, as we connect our story to our customer story, where are we connecting with them? On the bottom level, the red one, we have the physiological needs. This is air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. How are we meeting them? My business does not fit that category. But if you supply food or you supply shelter or clothing, you're going to meet your customers there. So you need to know that, and that's where they are. That's a primary thing that we need in order to live. The next step up in the orange section is safety needs. This is personal security, employment, resources. Does your company fit in that area? Or does it fit in love and belonging, where you focus on friendship, a sense of family, connection? Is it self-esteem? Is it self-actualization? Where are you meeting your client? And be honest in this. I could easily say to my clients, well, no, I am a primary need to your business, but I'm not. Actually doing the day-to-day business of a company is their primary function that they need to do. Adding video, social, and communication is a secondary thing. They need to be able to actually function as a business first. So figure out where you are. You can find this chart on Google. Just type in Maslow's hierarchy of needs and really consider where you are meeting your customer and how your story kind of connects with where they are. So if you have taken any, if you've read or taken any business classes, you've probably heard of the know, like, and trust factor. So people do business with other people, not corporations. And so if people know you, they like you, and they trust you, you're going to see your business do much better. So no, what does a customer need to know about your business? This is where we can overcomplicate things, and we need to be careful not to do that. What does a customer truly need to know about you? In my case, we produce video, social, and podcast content. That's what we do. That's the bare minimum they need to know. Once they know that I can fulfill that need of theirs, then I can go into the next step, which is, why would a customer like you? You can provide the best services out there, but if you are someone who is rude and selfish and ignorant, you're probably not going to have a lot of people that like you. So why would people like you? This goes back to your character, your morals, your values, what you believe in. And this is where you can really connect with people on that story level. I just saw an ad as I was watching YouTube yesterday, and it was a meat commercial for bacon. And the whole premise of the commercial is that they package their bacon in a zero or carbon neutral facility. And so what that said to me was, they produce bacon and other meats, and then why customers would like them, or what separates them, is they're really focused on providing green solutions. They're in a carbon neutral facility. And so we need to begin thinking past just our products. We need to think, what are some other things that we stand for, and unite with those there as well. And then, why would a customer trust you? So our reputations precede us, right? So if a customer is doing research and they see, okay, so this is what that customer does, this is what they say about themselves, how they, what they believe in, how they, envision their company, is that enough to trust? And so I read customer testimonials on Facebook or on Google or on Yelp to see, are they who they say they are? Can I trust them? And this is something that is a really difficult thing, especially as a small business owner, because we're going up against the big giants, the big box stores, the chains, where we need to really show, you can trust us. We can provide that big level service or product, but we can do it at a more intimate and local level. And you can trust us that we can provide exactly what you need. So by sharing your story and your experiences, sharing your customer experiences, your expertise, it's going to build that confidence in your customer base and in your community that makes the decision process for them much easier. But I also want to take just a moment and say this. As you're sharing your story, don't just focus on all of the positive things that have happened. Share some of the mistakes that you've made. Show some of the experiences where you've had to grow, where you've had to expand how you think and how you operate, and own up to it. Like, you got to use some common sense in there. But if you're just all rainbows and lollipops, I don't know if that's an expression that people use anymore, but I just used it, so we'll go with it. But if you're just all happy all the time, that's not realistic. Chris talked about being realistic in your story, and that's just not true. I mean, there's a lot of days that are hard, that are difficult. There's a lot of mistakes that I've made throughout my career that I've had to go back and correct. And that's what's going to make you relatable. That's what's going to make you likable, because people are going to say, you know what? He admitted, and he said that he went through that kind of issue. You know what? Me as a customer, I've made mistakes. That's going to make me trust them a little bit more, knowing that they're willing to fess up and say, hey, here's how we've had to adapt. So don't just share all the positive things. Definitely share the positive things, but be willing to throw in where you've made a couple mistakes and how you've grown so that you're not repeating those mistakes again. So we can't be afraid to fail. We need to throw out, and we need to try a lot of different things, and realizing that a lot of different things that we try aren't going to necessarily work. But when we find something that does work, it is going to be such a reward in not just our business, but in our community and how people look at us. Someone had talked about, how do we change directions? And an example that we had recently that was a temporary pivot that we need to make was during COVID. A lot of the schools in our areas canceled all of their graduations. And so we saw this as an opportunity, and we said, well, it's not right that these kids can't have a proper graduation. And so we created virtual graduations for some of our local schools, and we took photos of the kids and we did a whole ceremony. We live streamed it for them so that they all came together and were able to do that. Now that things are back to normal, we don't need that, but it met a need that our customers had, and we had the ability to do it. And so it fit within our story to be able to expand our services, to be able to offer something that our community needed at that time. So as we begin to wrap up, I just want you to think, are there small changes that need to be made in our company that would allow us to reach more people, or allow us to provide a current service that we already have in a better way? Is there a need that we can meet in people's lives that isn't being met right now, or isn't being met well by our competition? Is there a way that we can show that we can do it a little bit better? So to go back to our question, how does sharing my story sell more of my products or services? By communicating who you are and what you do, you're not creating a transaction, you're creating a relationship. And as I've studied how our communities went from small single store communities and with just a general store to the robust communities that we had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the biggest thing that people talked about was their relationship with the business owners. They knew who they were going to for their banking. They knew who they were going to for their groceries, their butcher, their flour, their whomever you want. And so I think we need to really focus on, how do we get back to that? How do we get back to fighting as small business owners and saying, we can provide just what the other people do? And through web, through social, through video, through podcasting, through a lot of different means that even aren't digital, we can begin to do that. And as Chris said earlier, Your story isn't something that happened in the past. It's something that you are still writing and creating today. And it's something that you've pre-written for the future. We have dreams, we have goals that we want to work towards. And today is a day that we can help go one step closer to that. And so I want you to think about this. How does your story connect and affect the lives of your customers? How do your products, how do your services meet their needs and make their lives better? Focus on that, share those stories. One of the biggest ways to advance your story is by sharing other people's stories. So if you do this, you take the time, you'll end up having more content than you can even dream about, and it won't be so exhausting as you do it. So we'll now open this up for some questions. If you have any, I'm going to quit sharing my screen so that I can read the comments down here.